The order, my watch says it's 7:38.
Perfect.
And this is the regular February meeting of the APDC 2023. Richard McGrath is not present at this time. It looks like maybe he won't make it tonight. I'm the chair, Colin Dwyer. Our clerk, William Lloyd, Anthony Scullambrini, and our new member, Nathan Lockwood. So, opening public comment. It doesn't look like we have anybody here. So we're going to skip over that part. Review of minutes. We were all, as of January, we were caught up on minutes, weren't we?
We were.
Okay, great. Do you have minutes from January 5th?
I do have minutes from the January 5th meeting.
Would you like to read them?
Sure. All right. So the review of the minutes of the January 5th meeting, we had Miss Anna Lockwood asked for the meeting to be recorded for all meetings in the future, which we currently have going on right now.
That was in January? Oh, okay.
January 5th.
All right.
Correspondence, we received the resignation of Mr. Niscaro from the council.
Nicastro.
Niscastro.
Yep.
He was looking into the proper procedure for his formal resignation at that time.
Yep.
New business, December meeting was not official due to the agenda not being posted, which was corrected. We approved the October, November minutes. All were in favor. Old business. Coordination for the December appearance at town meeting could not be completed by the APTC due to the short notice and with 2 members being out of town when the request was made. Looking to reschedule that. Issues to reconsider when we were looking at the CTA for the Ritter building. The APTC informed the select board that it would need to be resubmitted. The select board asked via the town manager to reconsider original request. Current plan does not match the replace versus refurbished line item for line items. That was one of the requests that we were pushing back on to the select board to send back out to a engineering firm to request. Some of the items to conclude the storm windows and changes in scope for some of the line items we talked about. Chair comments, decision to reconsider the existing CTA would be no from him. Would move to redo replacement of windows was removed from the application. Member was seconded by myself. Without changes to the CTA, no changes to the current condition, no change in voter status. Member Scullambrini, same, would request a new architect selected. We meet and discuss on the windows and compare the maintenance that would be needed for the new windows versus the old frame. Member McGrath also agreed to deny the CTA with a resubmittal. Then we briefly talked about what would be considered. My mouse moved, sorry. What would be constitute a completed application? Requirements need to be clear on the application to the submitter. It's one of the items we talked about looking into, is clarifying that on the application process. Response to comment versus the response to the comment of preservation versus historical commission. You cannot preserve something that's not historical, and that is in our APDC mission statement. And then the other business was Mr. McGrath gave us some great literature on demolition by neglect for an article to read, and then we adjourned at 8:46 p.m.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that was I think it was the demo by neglect, that was a statement prepared by the Historical Commission. Yep. Yeah, the only, the main comment I would have is just make sure that we have Tony Nicastro's name spelled right. It's Nicastro.
Yep, I'll double check that before I send it out.
Any other comments on the minutes?
Oh.
Okay.
Move to accept.
Sorry?
I'll move to accept.
We have a motion to accept, and a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great. Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Do we have any correspondence today?
None that I know.
Okay.
I know, yeah.
I'm not aware of it either. Anything either. I haven't received any CTAs or anything like that. Old business. We did want to go over this about reviewing the process. Unless, is it too awkward? Maybe we should skip right to our introductions, yeah? How about that? All right. So we're going to skip ahead in the agenda to welcome Nathan Lockwood to the APDC. And why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history with the town and with this bylaw in particular, and why you joined this board. And we can tell you a little bit about ourselves as well.
All right, yeah. So I'm happy to do that. Thanks, Colin. My name's Nathan Lockwood. I live at 91 Main Street, just down the street here. Neighbors with Colin. We moved there in 2005. Lived in Massachusetts since '93 when I graduated from college. Born in Fall River, way back. I worked in technology for 25 years. Now I work in the nonprofit sector. I'm a director for a nonprofit. Previously I've served on the planning board for over 5 years. I don't remember the exact dates. I want to say, maybe through 2015 or something like that. I'd have to go look it up exactly. Learned a lot doing that. I was actually on the planning board that worked together to craft and get past both the Architectural Preservation District and the Village District bylaw. I live in a historic home. I'm very passionate about historic structures and, really think they're an important part of, just giving us a sense of our history and the place we are and a sense of continuity. It's kind of means a lot to me. So I was someone on the planning board who put a lot of emphasis on making sure that we got the Architectural Preservation District in place alongside of the, which we'll talk more about, alongside of the Village District bylaw. Those were two things that, I and I think the board as well felt, really strongly were important to go together, basically, to achieve the goals that were important to the town, which we can get into more. But I've got two kids. I live with my wife Anna and two kids, used to live with two kids. Two kids graduated from college now. One of them still lives with us and works from home, and we have a dog. And I think that's pretty much everything you could possibly want to know about. But I'm open to questions if I've left anything out there.
The Village District bylaw, what preceded, what came first, the Village District or the APD?
They were introduced simultaneously by design.
So that they were both approved at the same special time meeting, or the annual time meeting in 2015?
Yeah, I don't know if it was the May or this November, but yes, they were both approved at the same meeting. And it was, in fact, the planning board's position that one should not be passed without the other. In particular, the Village District shouldn't be passed without the Architectural Preservation District bylaw.
In reading the Village District bylaw, one of the things that, I've heard directly from the current select board chair, Michael Ray Jeffries, is that somehow, some way, the APDC is holding up progress and keeping people from doing things in Lunenburg. when I look at the village district bylaw, there's probably more financial implications for someone who wants to do something in what I like to call downtown Lunenburg, within the village district, which also mirrors the architectural preservation district. And, I've only been on this group for, 10 months, I think. And I've not heard one person say anything bad about the village district bylaw. But I've heard a lot of people complain about the architectural preservation district bylaw. Why do you think that's the case, Nathan?
Yeah. So do we want to procedurally? Do we want to just get right into the discussion of the origin of the bylaw?
Yeah, I mean, I was hoping that we would introduce ourselves, but as long as that's the direction the conversation is taken, that's fine. I did intend to discuss that, so why don't we?
Why don't I'd love to get to know these guys, know who I'm talking to here real quick first.
I'm a civil engineer. I'm retired. I came to Massachusetts in June of 2020 because of a family situation, and lived in Ohio. Was actively involved as a civil engineer with historic preservation at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I mean, had constant negotiations with the State Historic Preservation Office because federal installations are not given a free pass when dealing with historic preservation and state historic preservation offices. We have to follow the federal law, and then of course the federal law spawns a lot of state laws with regards to historic. So I had a lot of experience there. I retired from the Air Force and then went to work for a national heritage area and associated with the history of the Wright brothers.
Oh, wow.
And we did extensive renovation of historic facilities in what was called, on paper, the West 3rd Street Historic District, but which most people called the Wright-Dunbar National Historic District. So I had a lot of experience in dealing with historic restoration work. And I did that, I did my Air Force career, for 25 years, and then I worked for another 18 years for this nonprofit National Heritage Area. So those are my experiences in the historic preservation business.
Oh, wow.
So.
Yeah, and it's great to meet you. I recall at the last town meeting, it was interesting to hear you talk in some detail about some of the projects I think you worked on at the Air Force Base. So awesome.
Yeah.
So William Lloyd, I've lived in Lunenburg now for 3.5 years, going on 4 years. Active duty Air Force still, out of Hanscom. Brought up in the civil engineering world, actually. Was a CADSman, GIS tech, and project manager. Have a different role now. I'm actually part of the Air Force recruiting team here. But wanted to get involved in the town. Saw this position come up. With my experience, I was a good fit. Luckily, they voted me in. So, I've always loved architecture. I went to college originally for architecture until it got too expensive, and been doing it ever since. I have my degree in project management from the University of New Hampshire. So, looking forward to be here. And we settled. We bought a house here. We set roots, and we don't plan to move until the kiddos go to college. So, be here for a while.
And someday to be retired from the Air Force, right?
1 year.
Awesome. Great to meet you.
Yeah, and Cullen Dwyer. I got onto this board. My connection to it is through the Historic Society, or I'm sorry, the Historic Commission of Lunenburg. I live near Nathan in a historic house and an enthusiast of history and historic architecture, and was on the Historic Commission when the commission sponsored this bylaw. So I served on both the Historic Commission and the APDC for some years, and now I'm just this one. I'm off the Historic Commission now.
Super. Yeah. One thing I forgot to add about my resume. So in my 25 years in tech, 18 of it was spent working at CAD companies. So although I'm not an engineer by training, I've worked on products like with Pro Engineer, which is called something else now, from PTC, and Revit, which is a Autodesk product, and I did some work in their infrastructure division with Civil 3D and AutoCAD and was it InfraWorks or whatever they're calling it now. So it's fun. I like engineering stuff. So I haven't done engineering, but I've got a little exposure to it from that and being on the planning board. So
Great. Would you care to entertain Mr. Scullenbreen's question?
oh yeah, absolutely. No, I wasn't trying to dodge that. Yeah. So
I wasn't taken that way.
yeah, no. So for sure, so the question was why do people take some umbrage at the APDC? Well, you don't hear really a peep about the village district bylaw. Really good question. I think there's two reasons. One is the village district bylaw doesn't really prevent anyone from doing anything in its boundaries that someone would be likely to want to do right now. Meaning, I would say overall, the village district bylaw, well, it does have a design bylaw that provides some constraints in terms of new construction and whatnot. And it does prohibit the construction of new single-family homes, at least without a special permit, maybe just in general. Overall, it expands what it is possible for you to do in the village center district. I don't think we've seen much of the impact of that at this point, but planning, especially in a town like Lunenburg, can play out over years. So having the right foundation is good. I think the town is making progress in terms of what to do with some key properties in that district, and I think what happens with those will have a big impact on what the incentives are to do things in the village center district that could take advantage of the more permissive, and by more permissive what I mean is before it was a residential district, now it's really a mixed use district with a number of retail and commercial uses in addition to residential uses. It also allows for a significantly more dense residential construction, I believe. Certainly with mixed, and I don't remember the bylaw verbatim, but certainly for mixed use, you could build multi-unit residential with retail or commercial in it by right. I think you might even be able to do multi-unit apartments by right. They may need a special permit. I don't quote me on that one exactly, but you get the big point. And you can do more. Now there's not. It also changed the dimensional constraints for development in the village district, really allowing pretty dense development of your if you own a parcel, you could build with it went from like 40 or 50 foot setbacks to 5 foot setbacks and offsets off of the, you folks know the right terminology here, off of the public land or off of the boundaries of your parcel, which under the right conditions where it was made sense to do something like that would give you a lot of freedom to develop your parcel. That said, I mean, there are constraints, still natural environmental constraints in the village district as far as, wetlands and whatnot. But overall, a lot more possibilities there, especially if you look at large parcels like, where the primary school is, or if you look at where the Passios school is. And a part of the intent of the village district bylaw was to give the town more freedom to
create more density.
To create more density and just develop in a way that might make more sense for the town as they look to repurpose some of those lots and or buildings.
So why does the planning board so we pass a bylaw that says you can't have single family housing units anymore, yet it continues to grant exemptions to that. Like this White House that's right behind us, when that house went on the market, it said that this house is, if you're going to live in this house as a house,
So I'm trying to remember the way.
you have to get permission to do that.
Do you mean the new single story dwelling that they built on School Street?
I'm talking about the house that's right next to the Ritter building.
You can talk to Adam. My understanding is as long as that the existing uses are permitted until there's a significant lapse in the current use. So you could, if you're living in your house as a resident, you can sell it and someone can move in as a resident. That's no change in use. I think there is also an option to do a single family home by special permit. You can do multifamily homes by special permit. There was one granted, and this is I think a great example for our conversation of giving people more latitude for uses and how that can help with historic preservation, architectural preservation. If you look at the house, it's a couple doors down over there. It's got some big columns in front of it.
Yeah.
Beautiful home that was in quite a state of disrepair, was purchased by I think a really, an owner who was looking at it as an investment, but also as a way to restore a beautiful building to the town. And they did that, and they were, with the village district bylaw, they were able to get a special permit to do it as a two-family unit, which makes the economics work for the really sizable amount of money they had to put into the property. So more uses, we saw that as we passed the APDC, is like, done right, this could be really beneficial for it can make historic preservation more economical, which, in a town like Lunenburg, there are a lot of economic constraints, whether you're the town itself or whether you're an individual homeowner. So that was perceived as like a good achievement. A couple things I'll say. You asked the question, why do we hear some grief about the APDC? Not surprisingly, the APDC is a little bit more on the restrictions side of the equation, right? Like I'm off the top of my head, I don't know that the APDC lets you do anything new that you couldn't do before, but it might stop you from doing some things you did. So it's a little bit like good cop and bad cop. Village Center District was, if you want to make changes or something, was kind of good cop, and APDC. I'm kind of joking, obviously. Yeah. It's not bad cop. We wouldn't pass Village Center District without APDC, because with the liberalization of uses that we put in place in Town Center, for good reasons, which could be very aligned with historic preservation, if we didn't have the APDC, the problem is that for folks that don't care about historic preservation, but do want to take advantage of being able to develop something right in the center of Lunenburg, and it's, we don't know at what time that's going to become like the most amazing thing to do, but they might say, you know what, I could build exactly what I want here and just knock this old piece of junk thing from the 1800s down, and nobody can stop me. But the APDC can stop you. It was actually, honestly, first and foremost, it serves as just the basics of historic preservation. You can't preserve it if it's knocked down. So it's really in many ways intended as an anti-demolition bylaw to ensure that as we liberalize the use of town, that as people are developing their parcels at some point when it makes sense to them, that they're preserving, important, or, at least the structures and the outer general appearance of the historic nature of Lunenburg. And so it wasn't like a maximal, like if you go down to the Cape, or I don't know, Chatham or something, they have some much more rigorous historical preservation rules regarding what you can do with your property, what materials you can use, how you can alter it or add to it or not do so. This was not intended to be that. Although some people, that appeals to some people, overall the sentiment in town was we couldn't have gotten that through. Just, it wasn't politically possible, even if the whole planning board wanted to, and I don't think we were unified on that. I'm not sure, how I would even feel about that exactly. That wasn't the intent of that bylaw. And so anyways, that was kind of what the pairing was there for. But yeah, people complain about the APDC because it adds procedural steps. You've got some home, I don't know, for me anyways, you guys, engineers, you guys might be a lot handier and a lot better with this stuff than I am. Having to do something around your house is a big deal. You got to figure out what you want to do, how much money you want to spend. You got to call people up and, that aren't busy and get quotes from them. And so layering in additional steps for that, I'm not saying it's never warranted or whatever. I'm just saying you can see where people are like, it's adding impediments for them. And especially in situations where it's like, no, sorry, you can't do that. If they're not aligned in terms of the reasonableness of it, especially, that's where the pushback comes. I think more recently, some of the pushback's been in the relationship between the board and the APDC as opposed to the homeowners. Although maybe there's been stuff with homeowners, I don't know. But
Homeowners has been that's been a simple piece. I mean, I think that, you know, in the 10 months that I've been on the board, the angst has come from two town properties. First with the primary school and now with the Ritter building. And what's funny about the primary school is, this is before my time, and as I've said before, that ship sailed before I became a part of this group. If you were going to try and increase the density of downtown Lunenburg, primary school would have been a great place to start that process.
yeah,
You know, and unfortunately, that wasn't seen as a viable option. You know, so you had this village district bylaw, which says we want to increase the density. You know, we're gonna,
Right.
you know, we want to have a more walkable community for more people to be walking. And I mean, that's
Yes.
almost language out of the village
Yeah.
district bylaw. And it's kind of like, wow, you could have put some apartments, you could have put some senior apartments in the primary school, and then you would have had seniors walking to, you know, the senior center and past businesses. You know, so it's like, on one hand, it's like you have this, and then, like I said, since I've been here in 10 months, I've heard at least 3 or 4 houses, you know, that had to get a special permit in order to stay a residential house. This house right next to us being one of them. You know, because my son looked at that house because he was looking to move into Lunenburg. And when he looked at that house, I says, there's a thing here that says that you have to get you know, a special approval from the town of Lunenburg to buy this house and live in it as a house. So, you know, it's kind of like, so you have a bylaw that says, you know, we want to get rid of single-family housing in downtown Lunenburg. And then they constantly give exceptions to that.
well, yeah. So I think you should check. My understanding of that was that you don't need a special permit to continue the use, and you should talk to Adam about that.
You do.
That
You
was
did. In fact, that was one of the pieces of that. Like when he looked at that house, I says, "You probably would get it," but it says right here that you have to ask for it in order to get it.
Only if the use has changed, I thought.
No,
Like, or if it's
no, for it
lapsed.
to stay, for it to be a resident, you had to go to the, and in the discussions we've had, I've been representing the APDC on the Lunenburg Municipal Building, Design Committee, and we had that conversation. Matt and I had that conversation as kind of a side conversation about what you can do and what you can't do, and of course the Brooks House is another one. And I says, well, why don't we look at turning the Brooks House back into a residential unit? And he says, well, it violates the village district bylaw. So, it's kind of like, so you have this village district bylaw, which has, some real, I think some real glitches to it. If you're going to say you don't want to have single family housing in downtown Lunenburg, then don't keep granting requests.
Now, this is we went through this with the bylaw. It's a totally normal process to evolve the use of a district while allowing existing uses to continue. This happens everywhere. You'd be hard pressed to find a district that's been around for 100 years where something like this hasn't happened. And I think if you talk to Adam about that, he'll be able to clarify that. But I don't think it's a glitch. You can't write, and I think if you're involved in town government and you expect bylaws to be, perfect and tight in every manner, it's never going to happen because it's the realities are too complicated. There's so many scenarios, and you just got to do the best you can. I'm sure it's the same with engineering to a degree, right? I mean,
but the irony of the conversations we've had with the select board is that we haven't had problems with housing with residents. Every CTA that's come from a resident in the 10 months that I've been here.
well, that's good. So I mean, I'm getting involved partly because I really, I've heard some rumblings about the bylaw, and I think it's normal for these things to happen. I mean, I used to work in software. I mean, the software's never staying put. You're always iterating, whether it's fixing bugs or making improvements or whatever. And it's the same thing with bylaws and laws. And my personal feeling is, the more you want a good process, but the more you can, not at short, regular intervals, review, update, analyze, see how things are performing. If they're doing great, maybe do more of that. If there's things that aren't working, fix them and keep moving forward. Doesn't mean you got to throw the baby out with the bathwater or anything like that. But my concern is that's what happens if people have something in place, especially around bylaws or whatever. They're just like, this doesn't work. Chuck it. So my interest really in joining is to do whatever I can to, you guys have great experience. I have some experience from the town previously. I'm hoping that, together we can maybe find out how to solve this issue so that we're not butting heads either with the town or with residences, and maybe even getting better at doing the things that we want to see happen.
Well, when the bylaw was presented at town meeting in 2015, what were the negative comments made about having that bylaw passed? Were you a part of any of those discussions?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there were some residents, I think overwhelmingly, anytime you want to put restrictions on property owners on how they can use their property, that's usually not a real popular thing, especially if you're saying you can do this, there's something you can do now that we're going to implement a bylaw, and now it's going to be a little more onerous. I mean, you see the same thing with energy efficiency codes or you name it. It's never going to be, you're never not going to have any dissent or grumbling, but it'll pass if most people see some benefit in the greater good or something coming out of it. And I think that's how I would characterize the conversation about this bylaw. There were a few homeowners that were, philosophically opposed. I mean, some people are just philosophically opposed to public regulation of private property, right? So you've got that. You've got, just the inconvenience factor. And then maybe you have some people that see the benefit of that regulation. So I think the art of this is trying to craft things in a way, and you can never make everybody happy and you can never get it perfect, but to balance the private interest and the public interest, that's kind of like, you're looking for that sweet spot. And craft something that's, you can get some consensus on to move forward on whatever your goal is. In this case, our goal was to get more permissive uses, but feel very secure that we're not jeopardizing the heritage of the town.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think the village district has been? This will be my last question.
Okay.
Do you think the village district has achieved what it was set out to do?
The village district is really, it's a set of regulations that opens up the possibility of additional development. I haven't followed every project in the village district. I would say it's largely not been taken advantage of. That said, getting something of that scope, and Lunenburg, Lunenburg's history is pretty change resistant, right? Like a little bit hard to make changes here. So we needed something like that to be able to have forward conversations on repurposing town buildings, right? And you see how much, maybe we've had a lot of trouble even having those conversations with the village district in place. Without having the village district in place, it's like you have these prerequisites, like to do anything, you need the underlying district to support something. Now we got that something. So now a lot of the debate has been on, is the public willing to do the things that are permitted with the public spaces? Now we couldn't get to that next level conversation until we had that first level thing established. Now that we have that established, we can have conversations about how to repurpose these buildings. They're taking longer than I personally would like, but I think I'm hopeful. It all only takes that one. Over time, if we do grow together in terms of consensus on what to do, we might one day have a really great project that's good for a lot of folks happen either, just for example, at the old primary school or the Passios, or there's other parcels as well. I mean, there's really cool provisions of Village District about being able to develop campuses of buildings on a property. So I don't know that's going to happen this year or next year or in 5 years, but over 10 years, you know, year to year things don't seem to change that much, but over 10 years, you know, you can start to see significant changes, and yeah, it wouldn't shock me. So to your point, has it achieved its goals? Well, there haven't been a lot of complaints about it. I would say it's been underutilized, but I would say it has provided a foundation to have these other, not easy conversations, but allowed us to at least start working through them and figuring out, you know. So I guess that's my long-winded response, if that makes sense.
I would agree with that it's underutilized.
Absolutely.
We had a conversation earlier, and I know you hadn't read the guidelines, the rules and regulations at that time.
I'd read them a while. I'd read them probably, I don't know, 4 months ago or something. So it's been a while.
All right. But anyway, from our conversation, I got the impression that you had a different vision for how it would operate, like what architectural preservation meant, or what that was supposed to look like.
Yeah.
Than I did. So what was, I mean, just to review, the present bylaw, the way we operate it now is that it's based on, we look at the historic value of a contributing property, which is based on a number of factors, and we look at its current state of preservation, and the standard is that it should stay at that level or better. So you're, of course, welcome to and encouraged to restore a building, but you need to keep it at least as good as it is now, and good meaning from the sense of historical preservation and historical value. And our decision-making process is all based on that. Like, if sacrifices need to be made, are they really necessary? Or is there some way we can avoid them? We kind of go through that, and if they're necessary, there's no way to avoid them, there's no way to mitigate them, then, you know, we have to grant the permit to either demolish or do some alteration that we're not happy about. So that's where we're at right now. Did you have when you were helping to draft this bylaw, did you have a different vision than that?
Well, so yeah, and when you say did you have, so the planning board, what we agreed on for the APDC, so it was a sort of a collective vision in that sense, was significantly different than that, and it wasn't to cast aspersions on that the vision you described or that goal, but it would have been politically infeasible. That interpretation, basically. We had conversations with folks from the historical committee, like Rebecca Lantry,
yes.
Lantry,
Yeah.
and we also had conversations with, others, the building reuse committee, and I don't know, were they around then?
Yes.
I'm pretty sure they were. Yeah.
Yes, they were.
And with others. And it's sort of a balance of interests, between the different boards and the different people on even the planning board. And so where there's some, like I think initially, and I don't want to put words in Rebecca Lantry's mouth, I think, she's a staunch advocate for the Historical Society so, I think initially she may have felt that we were not going far enough. If it wasn't, there were people that thought that way. I don't want to ascribe that to her because I don't remember. And there were others that thought, oh my gosh, you're going to put restrictions on, we're trying to make this able to do more stuff, not less stuff, So we kind of had to forge something that was in between that. And I think where we landed, again, apologies, Rebecca, is really working off. But I think that we got a lot of alignment, even if we might share different ultimate visions of what we would like to have. I think the APDC is, let's just to keep it conceptually simple, think of it just as a structural anti-demolition bylaw. It's a little more, there's more to it than that. There's a design bylaw element to it, which sort of parallels what's in the village district design bylaw for new construction. But if we think of it primarily in those terms, we felt like this was a win for the historical committee. Like, this is a step forward because the anti-demolition protections in the APDC were far superior to anything that existed for the historical committee, including, and I understand this might not be perfect and something we'll probably have to review, demolition by neglect, which is covered in a much stronger way by the, even if, again, it needs some strengthening by the APDC.
It's addressed anyway, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we felt like this was a clear, like, step forward. Like, we were not confident. The reason we did the APDC was the existing protections available to the historical committee were not going to be enough to stop a serious developer with serious incentives to make change. And we wanted, a certain feel that would provide some continuity with the town. We weren't talking like, and you must walk around in pilgrim hats and churn your own butter and all this stuff. But it was, just some general things about the architectural style in the district. Buckles on your hat and all that. I don't know. You get the idea. So anyways, it was a compromise. And I think my recollection is that by the time we got to town, it was crafted over some time with public input. And, Rebecca and I think the historical committee was, I think it didn't go as far as some folks on the committee would have liked it to go. But I think Rebecca and the committee as a whole at least came to understand it, that it's way better than nothing. And that's really what we were up against, is like, can we get some significant protection that, which is really unparalleled actually in terms of protecting historical property, or, if we try to push it too far and tighten it up too much, people aren't going to pass it. And so that's kind of where we landed. Sorry for being long-winded.
No, that's answered my question very well. Thank you.
Who do you think wrote the purpose paragraphs? Because those are the ones that are probably preserving, restoring, and protecting groups of historical and architecturally significant buildings and the characteristics of their neighborhoods that are important to the town's architectural, cultural, economic, political, social history. That's a pretty powerful statement, preserving and restoring. When you look at the first paragraph, I think that gives the committee the right to say something like, if you have an old window, try and keep the old window. And of course that's been the big contention for this particular building. And, do you think that that's out of bounds, Nathan? That, we would go from that paragraph that says preserve, restore, and protect to say, well, if you got an old window, try and keep that old window.
Yes, this is a really good question. I think that's really good. It's one of the reasons I joined the board, is so that because I think,
This is where the rubber meets the road.
This is where the rubber meets the road. And the reality is, like I said, there's no perfect bylaw. And I think, my reaction, like when I read the guidelines, was, wow, this was, and not to say, I understand the goal, and I'm not, I don't think the goal, I respect the goal, but this was not what I recall the bylaw was written to do. So I went back and looked at the bylaw, and I said, yeah, here are the clauses that I thought would have made it in a different direction, put it in a different direction. But I also understood that there was going back and looking at it, even though I know what the intent was, I'm not going to say there's so much ambiguity in the language that it justifies what was put in the guidelines, but I could see where well-intended people it's sufficiently ambiguous that well-intended people might read it a bit differently, regardless of what one might say. Maybe there's one correct legal interpretation. The preamble I wouldn't read too much into. It's talking about preserving a building. What does it mean to preserve a building? What does it mean to preserve a building? Does it mean to preserve every antique nail in the floor? That's an introductory statement of intent, which is pretty high level. And yes, there is an intent to preserve and restore buildings. I think we can think of buildings that we'd like to see a little restoration done on in yes. Town center.
Sure.
But what does restoration? What is the degree to which restoration? The details of the bylaw try to flesh that out. I would say, having looked at the guidelines, saying no, I think they might have gone beyond what was intended. But going back and looking at it, I can see where, like I said, where there's I think what we have an opportunity to sort of take the experiences we've had with the other town bodies, with the residents, look at that and see if we can do some things to get it to something that is more transparent, more clear, and to more people, and will make it, when people read it, more likely to think it means something more similar, if that makes sense. Obviously, this is a very big conversation. Like, I don't think we're going to do this tonight, but I think this is something I'd like. I think it'd be great if we could do. One of the is go through, and I'm happy to do my part to help lay that out and whatever. Put my input into it so that you can share your input and whatever. We can have a conversation at some point.
See, when you look at the design standards in 113-9, I think that those kind of support the notion that there's some ambiguity in this bylaw. I mean, I think that guidelines are wonderful, but bylaws are the law.
Right.
And
Right.
and I do think that guidelines can change, and the bylaw says guidelines can change.
Right.
And I think that we need to look at that. But when you look at the section, I think if there's one thing that should happen to the bylaw, not the guidelines, is the bylaw needs to reduce the level of interpretation between preserving and restoring. And when I look at the design standards, I think these apply to things that are more new. Like it says, when reviewing an application, the APDC should consider the following standards, which are intended to guide a property owner in the site development and building design, as well as the APDC in its review of proposed actions, as described in 113.8 above. So that kind of says, I got something, I want to do something new. I got a house and I want to do something new, and because it talks about things like height and proportions. The height and proportions in relationship of height to width of windows. We're talking about something you're going to do to change the structure, and in relation to structures and spaces. So when you go through the design standards, I see those as supporting how the EPDC would guide someone who's doing something like a new addition,
Right.
or modifying, like adding a outbuilding or something along those lines.
That's exactly what I believe some of that stuff was intended for.
Yeah.
And is it possible? I haven't reviewed this nearly close enough to say, but it wouldn't shock me if, to your point, there maybe is some redundancy between the village district bylaw design standards and the APDC design standards. I don't know how much of that is legally necessary to make them stand on their own. I also know there was specific conversations about preserving the historic character of the properties that the historic buildings were on. I have to go back and look at the language. But yeah, I think all that, if there's opportunities to clarify that or make it more streamlined and compact, same intent, but like make it more clear. I think that's fair game.
Yeah, see, like when I look at design standards, those are the things that an architect should be paying attention to if he's going to take the Ritter building and add a municipal annex to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they were going to redesign the entryway. That's still part of the plan, right?
So so those are the kinds of things that deal with you're creating something new versus maintaining something that's old. And I think that the bylaw is deficient in describing how preserving and restoring takes place.
Okay. Yeah, I think that boundary, it's sort of sorry, go ahead.
And I know why now. Because no one wanted to put that stake in the ground because of fear. Like you had a zealot that probably really wanted to say, this is how to do preserving and restoring. And I think what you're saying is that there was a lot of opposition to taking that because then you might not get anything.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like
that's
like for like replacement. This that was like for like replacement was not Yeah, it was more about. I hear what you're saying about new versus restoring, but in some ways it's sort of a continuum, right? Like, at what point are you restoring or replacing versus new? You know, it's tricky stuff.
It is tricky, and I think that's you know, like, to get precise requires you to provide more detail. You know, the less detail that you have in a law, the more subject to interpretation it can be. And I think that's exactly what we're dealing with, is that there may be too much interpretation.
Yeah, and I think maybe the wording just could have been much more clear. I think also providing examples to clarify the wording would have been very helpful in some of the cases. You know, examples are great.
Yeah.
Back to my tech background, you know, coding, you know, when you're programming, seeing coding samples helps you learn how to use the programming language or libraries or whatever. So
You see, the bylaw says we're supposed to help preserve, restore, and protect historic structures. The bylaw also says if something's going to be built, it ought to have a shape that kind of mirrors what's there, you know. So, like, I think there's far more detail to how to deal with something that gets added that's not there already. You know, like a handicap accessible ramp to this building. I mean, the bylaw I think can be very helpful, and like the designer maintained the stone wall, you know, that was there. The designer, you know, kind of protected the windows, you know, these windows that are there. And I think that, you know, that's supporting the details that are in 113.9, which says design standards. And when I think of design standards, I think I'm building something new, I'm designing something new. But what's not really detailed in the bylaw, other than the preamble, the first paragraph, the purpose paragraph, is details on how you preserve and restore.
okay, yeah. So I think that's something. I mean, I appreciate. Yeah, I think this will be a great conversation.
Yes.
And I think it's an important conversation. So yeah, I look forward to future agendas like getting rolling up our sleeves, maybe a section at a time or whatever. And
Yeah.
What was the name of the woman? What's her name?
Rebecca Lantry.
Yeah. Is she still around?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
We gotta invite her to one of our meetings.
Yeah, oh boy. Okay,
Sure.
Yeah. She.
We were going to invite you, Nathan, before your name came up. In fact, I actually asked Michael Ray Jeffries. I says, "Well, who was involved in the creation of this bylaw?" And he mentioned, was it David McQuaid?
Damon.
Yeah.
Damon McQuaid.
Yeah.
And you. And before I had a chance to email you, you show up as a member, which is great.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, yes, we're not going to solve this tonight, but we have, I mean, before you came on the board, we had disparate ideas about, like, really what the purpose and point of this bylaw, like, what are we supposed to be doing? And I think our ideas are even more disparate now. So, I don't know, because as we were looking at, you know, reformulate just, you know, a bylaw review and making alterations to the bylaw, mostly procedural, I think we were talking about before. But I felt like this has been a lingering conversation that we, like, a lot of people, like, even on this board, don't agree, like, what are we supposed to be doing and what's important. And, you know, one of the big questions is, like, is it important if you can see it or not, you know? Do you need to preserve it if you can't see it?
Well, that's a landscape treatment issue, Colin. I mean, it's not unusual in historic preservation world to say, if you have historic windows on the front of the building and you want to replace windows in the back, if you can't see it, then because the windows in the back don't contribute to the historic landscape, then you don't have to worry about those.
Right, exactly, and so that's been part of the conversation. Is all I'm saying.
Yes,
it's entered into other discussions, just like, well, you can't really see that, you know, what's behind the siding or anything. So what does it matter?
Well, what do you do on the inside of the house? Tear it all down?
Well,
Right, yeah.
You know, and historically, historic preservationists, you know, if you look at the Department of Interior standards, and if you look at most state historic preservation guidelines, you know, inside is hands off, unless it's a very significant historic facility.
Yeah. Well, I think this bylaw makes that clear.
Yes, it does.
It's exempt. Yeah.
One of the things that I think is really crazy, because in most historic districts that I've been familiar with, exterior colors is a big issue.
Yeah.
You know, they create a historic color palette, but this bylaw exempts a historic
Yep.
color palette.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because it wasn't intended as a historic district per se. Yes, there are some design elements, but they felt that would be going
Too far.
too far. It wasn't-
Yes, because colors are.
It wasn't Lunenburg. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it wasn't the culture. You know what I mean? Like, that we want historical preservation, and we also want freedom. So you got to balance freedom and historical
Most people
preservation.
said, "Oh, they'll just keep it white."
Well, and that's another conversation we've had, is that, like, if it's like just about the design of the building and doing something that looks appropriate, do we really need a bylaw and a commission to regulate that bylaw? Because it seems like that's kind of what people do anyway.
Well, yeah, at minimum. I mean, I think that definitely. So yes and no. Like, I think we could definitely. We could potentially. I won't say definitely. We could potentially reduce the amount of review time and things that need to be reviewed. Like, as we. I think, once we've. I mean, this is my opinion. Okay, I'm not trying to. My opinion is, if we firm up, have a good conversation, get aligned on how to firm up the bylaw itself. Then as we're crafting the guidelines and the processes, there may be an opportunity to create a more streamlined, less used procedure where fewer things come to the committee, where many things are, because they are clearer, they're easier for the building inspector to just adjudicate and, And so the things that are coming to the committee are the most serious things, like major...
Not necessarily.
Well, but that's your vision.
That's
Yeah.
what my,
Oh, you're
hope,
saying-
my hope would be, that we could set it up like that so that,
I don't think the building commissioner wants anything to do.
well, no, I understand. Well,
Well, I guess a good example of that would be the building here that got hit by the car, and she was just replacing wood for wood.
Of a good example of what wouldn't need to
Well,
come.
wouldn't need a lot of detail and review.
And we approved that same day she brought it to us.
Yeah,
Well, yeah, but I mean, she did a, that was
No, she did
she
her
did a
homework,
full on
yeah.
historical restoration, and it's like even the interior members were made out of antique wood and everything, because I don't know, because that's the way she was. So
yeah, she was going that road anyway.
Yeah.
And it's like Dawn Marshall, the woman who lives in the Burbank house, she came to us and said, "I'm thinking about putting solar on my house," and we said, "You don't have the original roof." It's like you got 21st century, asbestos shingles sitting on your roof. It's kind of like
why not, right?
Right? Why not?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So at any rate, I think we could get it more. We might be able to get it. So I don't think you get rid of it, because I think you need someone there. Like, if there's like a proposal for demolition or something like that, who can represent the town and say,
Well, this is a good segue for this.
yeah, which I thought I had my copy in here, the flow chart.
Hey, you can borrow that because I have the.
Okay, well, Nathan, why don't you look on that? It's
Yeah.
not that great a printout.
So
I'll get
just
that
one
on
last,
the screen.
if I may add one last thing. I mean, there's
Please
a number
do.
of things we can review. I think that, by reviewing and tightening up this bylaw, hypothetically, let's say we do end up in a place where what I have described as the intent, we get the bylaw and the guidelines shaped back towards that. And if you feel really strongly about historical preservation, you might say, like, well, we had this opportunity to do more, and now we're doing less. I think that the benefit still of doing this process, even if it does go that direction, is that it gives us the opportunity to look at what might be more effective mechanisms that we can work towards for doing more extensive historic preservation where that's merited. Not necessarily in this bylaw even, but the great thing about the experience of this bylaw is you've seen some examples in town of situations where, wow, we wish we could have, we wish we could have preserved this, we wish we could have fully restored this or whatnot. And I think kind of redefining what this bylaw does in a way that the town is comfortable with, and we can stand behind and feel like we've all got a common understanding and a smooth process, then allows us to turn our attention, allows the historical,
Yes.
allows this committee or people on it to do less, to your point, not disband the committee because they'll still have to enforce this, but do more time investing in other programs for historical preservation. And I don't know, some of the things I've heard about, I wonder for some of these, you need carrots and sticks, but I'm thinking that there are maybe some opportunities of carrots we've left on the table that might be more effective of some of this stuff, especially where you're talking, either the town or people incurring costs. There's things like the, help me out here, the thing we haven't passed that a lot of towns have passed.
Community Preservation Act.
Community Preservation Act, for
Right.
example,
Yeah.
that might, create funding to help, somebody in town, historical committee or someone adjudicate how those funds are used to allocate, whatever.
Yep.
Anyways, thanks for, let's turn to this thing. Sorry, I just wanted to.
Yeah, no, point well taken. I think it's very, very well explained. So thank you very much for that. And I'm looking for my copy of the flow chart. I think I do have it. Have people had a chance to look at this?
I think it's I think it's right on, and I think that with the only thing that I think we need to do is I think we need to better identify or describe somebody who wants to come in with a project like the Ritter Building, which we know is going to end up in binding review, and someone who says, I'm thinking about putting solar on my roof on a very historic house. And so we have terminology here that I think could be tightened up. And I absolutely positively want to do two things for residents. I want to make sure that we have an application. Well, I think this is great for us, Colin, for us to understand what the process is. But what I want to see us end up with is an application that when a person who wants to do something at their house reads the application, they know exactly what they have to do, and they will know exactly what we're going to do as a commission. And I think this part right here, your flow chart, it clearly identifies, in my mind, what I have to do as a member of the commission. What we need to do is to figure out a way to communicate this process on that application form so that the resident knows what they have to do to get it to the launching point and what they should expect from us. And I think one of the big issues is that we have this kind of an application form that's kind of a one size that doesn't fit anybody very well.
Right, yeah. Right.
And I think that what we ought to do is we ought to create an application form that has like parts to it. And one says, I want to do something simple. And then we look at it and we tell them how to describe what something simple looks like. And then that application then says, I want to do something complicated. And here are all the, like I don't think someone should have to fill out, like the woman who came in and asked us, Don Marshall came in and asked us for, what do we think about putting solar on her roof? She should not have to go get the abutters list. Yet technically, the way the application reads, she does. And we shouldn't put someone through the ringer in order to get to that point.
Right.
So maybe what we do is we have two forms. One for, I want to do something simple, and they can describe it. And so far, all the simple ones, have been fairly easy for us to review and approve.
Yeah.
The only complicated ones have been the two that came from the town.
Yeah. Yeah.
Question, and I apologize because I haven't been deep in the weeds in this for a while. So if I was going to put solar panel, and I'm going to give away how little I've done on my house in the last
You have a
several
slate
years.
roof.
I do have a slate roof on part of it. Let's say on the part that wasn't slate, I wanted to put solar panels or whatever. I probably need to get a building permit for that, I'm
Oh,
assuming.
absolutely.
Right. So I'm wondering if,
Because you need an electrician to do that.
is that what the intake process is right now? When I go to get the building permit, they let me know? Okay, well that's to me, that's like right there. That I should be able to be completely ignorant of the village district bylaw, and well, it'd be nice if I'm aware of it because then maybe I'd do something in advance. But worst case scenario, I go to get my building permit, or I contact them and they say, "Hey, just heads up, you're in the village district. Take one of your really nice form, start the process there. You know, what I mean?
They should. They normally
I agree.
do.
I agree.
Well,
Absolutely. I mean, I think that
I think they normally do too.
Yeah.
They do.
they've been
send people
telling
that way.
people
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah.
But I think that that's, you know, we need to have more conversation with Casey to make sure that he understands, you know, the
Sure.
issues that we're wrestling with.
Right.
And like, for example, one of the things that came to our attention through Casey was someone put in new windows in their house in the Architectural Preservation District, and they not only didn't tell us that they were going to do that, and they didn't tell Casey they were going to do that. I don't know. How did he find out about that? Do you
I think
know?
he just drove by and noticed.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yes. So, you know, they didn't even get a building permit to do something. Even if the building had been sitting outside the district, they should have gotten a building permit for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I you know, like, and there's a very nice automated portal for getting into the building permit process for the town of Lunenburg. It's actually, you know, it's not residential friendly. Like, you know, if you're a resident, it's probably not as good for you to use that as if you were, you know,
A contractor.
Yeah.
So how does, so I apologize because, yeah, I did participate in writing this bylaw.
That's a great question.
But how does this work in relation to the building permit process right now? Are they just separate? Is it just like, you're not supposed to do anything till you get this, but it's just like completely independent of the building permit process?
Yeah.
That might be, if we could work with folks and they were amenable to it, just, why not just have it be part of one process? A permit's, you know.
I think that's a wonderful.
Yes.
But see, that goes back to, we know what we're going to do. We need to make it perfectly. We need to make it perfectly clear to the residents what they have to do.
Right.
I mean, the purpose of this flow chart was something I felt like we needed to clarify just for ourselves what the process that's stated in the bylaw says. And I feel like this is what the bylaw says happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wanted the people to critique me and say, well, I wouldn't read it that way. I think this arrow should go straight to this box, and there you should have an intermediary here. I don't know if you have another interpretation, but I wanted to set out the timeline, so I kind of inserted days on the arrows, or on some of them anyway.
See,
And
definite.
what the process was.
In definitions, 113-2, it defines administrative review and determination of applicability. And in the flow chart, the first box is administrative review. But we on the application form itself, it says you're encouraged to, if you're going to do something that's going to be substantial, you're encouraged to go ask for administrative review. And there's a lot of discussion of administrative review in the bylaw itself.
Yes.
I think that administrative review is mostly thinking that you're going to end up doing something that's going to require a binding review.
Right.
You know,
Right.
versus an administrative review being, I want to put solar on my house. Can I do that?
Right.
You know,
I mean, and that I think
there's
would
no
be a
difference between the
fair
two.
criticism of this flow chart is that the first box here is request administrative review or apply for CTA, and I'd say the bylaw kind of treats those as two separate things. They're not part of the same
Right.
flow chart. That you don't, like, if you're requesting administrative review, you don't have to apply for anything. You're just calling us up and asking for a review.
But then the application defines administrative review, you know, like, it says if you're going to be doing something that's going to lead to a binding review, you
Right.
should ask for administrative review in advance.
Right.
You know, so we kind of.
But it's not required.
What?
They do say it's not required.
I know.
Right.
But see, by the same token, we want, like, someone who wants to do something on a house that's in the historic district, we want them to be able to understand what is it that they're asking us to do. I mean, like, to put solar panels on a roof that's already been replaced isn't going to lead to a binding review, you know? And I think that's, you know, we need to do a better job of defining that kind of step that someone would want to take versus I'm going to take the Luther Burbank house and completely remodel the exterior. That's going to be a binding review discussion.
Right.
You know, we would want them to use, you know, the materials that are going to be in conjunction, you know, that will reflect well on that facility.
Yeah.
Like, we don't want her to take out old wood windows and put in aluminum windows or vinyl windows that don't look like new windows or look like old windows.
Yeah, I mean, I think that depends on where, like in the intent of the old bylaw, windows weren't, materials on windows and siding or whatever, or roofing wasn't intended to be regulated, so.
What old bylaw?
So not old, the current, the APDC, the APD bylaw.
Yeah.
But that's back to the conversation we talked about
Yeah.
ambiguity and
Right.
whatever. Yeah, so we can get into that more later. But yeah, I hear right. There are cases like that where sure you'd want more review. I guess I'm wondering if the more we can spell out those 95% cases,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and then just let the building inspector, if it was part of I don't mean to beat a dead horse, but if part of the permitting process, it's like solar panels. I have that example. Yeah, they don't care about that. They don't care about this. They don't care about this. And then
We would care about you putting solar panels on your slate roof, though.
right. But he would know. Solar panels on a contemporary roof.
Right.
Right.
Not an issue.
Yeah, no, man, I think this is great. I think it's a excellent idea of just rolling it into the permitting process, because I think one of the big problems with administrative review is that they don't have to submit anything. So it's not clear what we're reviewing. There's no record of it, there's no anything.
And I think we ought to say that there ought to be a piece of paper attached to an administrative review. We ought to, maybe what we
Well,
don't call it
if it's all part of the building permit process, they're gonna have to apply to
Right. So
for a
maybe-
building permit, and that's gonna spell everything out, right?
Maybe what we do is we say, we have, rather than calling it administrative review, let's give it a different name, like a pre-project proposal discussion or pre-project proposal
Right, yeah.
submittal.
So just back to the building permit thing. So part of that change would be taking the onus off of the homeowner to decide if they need to apply for this thing or whatever. And it moves it to the building inspector. You know what I mean? Like to tell them you need to get this review or you don't. Now it might not be binding. It might turn out to be nothing. But if the building inspector's not sure, he says whatever.
Yeah, go have a conversation with them.
Exactly. But
There's got to be a piece of paper that generates that conversation.
Sure, exactly. And then we can have paper or whatever, but the key thing is we're taking the onus off of the homeowner and I don't think we're putting an undue burden on the building inspector. I don't think the regulations that are crafted or that we would craft would be, I think we would need to provide things much clearer than what's in there now, but I think we could conceivably give the building inspector enough guidelines so that, and make it easy for him to say, yeah, I'm totally sure this is the right thing, or just throw it over the fence. And of course it only applies when it's in this district, so it's not like every permit he's dealing with.
Right.
I think that Casey Burlingham, the building commissioner, he was part of our Lunenburg
Burlingame, I believe it's.
Burlingham?
Burlingame? I think?
Burlingame? All right.
Yeah.
He was a part of our Lunenburg Municipal Design Committee discussion we had about Town Hall. And the Ritter Annex, that's one of the options that's being considered, And I think he understands the historic preservation process. So I agree that if someone's going to do something, they're going to have to get a building permit. That's a great place to start this process for the residents. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we talked about as part of our discussion, we tried to amend the bylaw and that got voted down. We were actually trying to make this a simpler process and to try and shorten the timelines, but we wanted more flexibility within that the new revised timeline. We didn't want to have to commit to this number of days, that number of days. We just said we're going to give you an answer in 75 days. And that got turned down at special town meeting in November. But I think that we should be able to go back to the building inspection department and say, you take the first request, and then you send those people to us. But then he has an understanding of what it is that's easy, and he has an understanding of what's difficult. And I think Casey could be an ally for us.
Okay.
So, but he's got a lot of things on his plate,
Yeah, we probably want to flesh it out a little bit.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. sorry, yeah, that's great. That makes sense.
Well, I think we've had a lot of good conversation tonight. I'd like to walk away from the meeting with some action items.
One, if I may, one thought before, just piggybacking on that. Yeah, so I mean, imagine we did that. What I'm wondering is if we, back to the historical, how to engage residents, like, I think you and I were talking a little bit about, back to the carrots part of it, like, apart from the APDC, if we were able to develop some carrots for historical preservation, like, if the historical commission, maybe they had resources where if I own a historic home, and I want to make a change, what resources can you offer me? Not just financial, but maybe you can have a list of, contractors that will do reasonable rate work, or, pro bono experts who can give me a pro bono opinion or whatnot. Or maybe someone from this commission wants to come down and, share some thoughts or that sort of thing. Or maybe, like, if we had the CPA in place, maybe there would be some funds to, like, give low interest loans or a subsidy to work that for places with that kind of thing. So it's kind of like they're incented. They have an easy to use portal where they can go to. So it's kind of like separate. Like, hey, listen, if you just want to do your thing, you go to the building inspector and follow the process. If you love historical stuff, we want to support you with that. Come here.
I think that, we actually have some money from the town. We were given $5,000. And one of the things that I was thinking that we could do with that is prepare like a little handbook for the residents that says if you live in a historic structure, we could go through and say, these are the kinds of things that you should be looking to do with your historic building, to keep the integrity of the building. And I think people that live in old historic buildings, they would be receptive to that. And in fact, I think in the 10 months that I've been here, all the people that have come in with, that live in a district, that are living in old houses, they have been very respectful of the fact that they live in an old house, So I think they would appreciate the help. I think that, the carrot approach is something that we could do. We've been overwhelmed by this building, and the commissioners before I came on were overwhelmed by the primary school.
Oh yeah.
Fair enough. Yep.
And that's really kind of, now the town's overwhelmed by taxes.
Well, how refreshing. Something else,
Yes.
So before we close up the meeting, what could we do before our next meeting to make some progress on some of the things that we've talked about?
Well, we have a deadline if you want to do any bylaw changes at the town meeting in May. And
Yes.
that deadline's not that far away.
Yeah, I think realistically, I mean, I'd love to have it done in May. They asked me when I joined, what would I be wrapped up by July?
Yeah.
And I was like, would I run again in July? I'm like, maybe I'll be wrapped up. Realistically, no, we're not gonna. It's not gonna be till, with the public hearings and everything, which is important.
Right.
I do think we need to start the process, like between next meeting. Like, let's pick something. Maybe just review it. Each of us review it. Come back to the next meeting with a better sense of like where we want to start attacking it. So together, next meeting we can make like a high-level plan about how we're gonna do this review process. But I don't think we're gonna be able to, in my personal opinions, I don't think we'll be
I
able
don't
to.
think we will either. Especially because I thought that the changes that we wanted to make for the special town meeting in November, where we were going to shorten the time frame, I thought everybody would jump on that, and we got a lot of pushback from the.
Well, they did jump on it.
Yeah, they did. in the opposite way that I thought. It's like, hey, we're shortening this process. Everybody's been complaining about how long it takes to do. And we wanted to shorten the process, and we got nowhere with that. So I don't think there's any way in, God's green acres that we're going to get this done for a May meeting.
May now.
No, I don't think so either. I think we
Because-
need to have a lot more comedy among ourselves about
Yeah.
exactly what the bylaw says now and what it should say. In our process.
Like one of the things I want to get right, like one of the things that I thought we really lost, one of the little nuances of the bylaw change that we proposed in November, was that we would get official permission not to have a resident have to drop a piece of paper off of the town clerk and come over here and drop that same piece, drop a duplicate piece of paper off over here. It's like, that's insane. No resident should have to drop 2 pieces of paper off with the same town in 2 different offices, you know.
Great bullet item. Put that on the punch list, and we're gonna.
Yeah,
that.
the dates, shortening the process was going to be a victory, but the real victory was we were going to change that requirement.
Well, I have an idea. I mean, I put together this sketch of the process flow chart. You mentioned the idea of we should have a flow chart for the applicant, like. Maybe that would be a good project to create a sketch, and that would like kind of help guide the conversation of exactly how the bylaw should read and how our rules and regulations should read. And you also mentioned revising our application form, and
I'll take that on.
totally like and just if you even just sketch it out on a piece of paper, it doesn't have to look all fancy. Like make it just a draft, but basically kind of lay it out like what should it look like.
Well, the application guide, the application itself is driven by the guidelines, but the one thing that would have to get changed is the language in the APD about, like, if it says the town clerk, then that's where it's going to go. I mean, the application right now would go there. But if we engage the building inspector, then somehow, some way, we have to then we would have to modify the bylaw to let that application now bypass the town clerk. I mean, that was one of the reasons why, we got rid of the town clerk in that proposed change.
Right.
And now it's like it's still there, so if we have an application, it means that someone's got to go to the building inspector, or someone's got to go to the town clerk. And I think that it ought to go to the building inspector.
Right, and land use. Yeah.
Well,
you have to go all 3, right?
Yeah, well, the way it is right now is that we're requiring the resident to go to 2 places. Whereas what it ought to be, the resident goes to 1 place, and then the town staffs the piece of paper.
Right.
To suit the process that the town has imposed upon the resident.
Well, okay, so I haven't looked at this form before, but I guess the question is it something that the building inspector could just fill out themselves based on whatever they're receiving for the building permit? No? Okay, gotcha. So they would say, okay.
Not with the current, not the way the form is set up right now. Now, maybe we change the form to get rid of, we require the resident to give us 8 hard copies of stuff.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And I think that's nuts, because the 8 hard copies that we got for this project, you couldn't read anything without a magnifying glass.
Okay.
All right. Well, why don't you?
So I'll work on the form.
Why don't you work on the form?
And then I'll identify what pieces
existing,
of the form.
and maybe you could do another version of just like, and this is how I think it ought to look.
Yeah. We'll work on the form and identify the pieces of the bylaw that might need change.
Or maybe there shouldn't be a form. Maybe they should just go to the building inspector, and the building inspector should fill out the form. I don't know.
Gotta have a piece of paper.
Or some document, some application. But all I'm saying is think outside the box.
Yeah, I need to check out. I'll take the homework to look at the form.
The form, I have to admit, the form is kind of inscrutable. It's really not clear
It has
what you're supposed to do or who's supposed to initial what box or what. So yeah. It's not a good form.
Then you got to pay a fee at certain points in time, and
Well, I guess I think there's a lot of opportunity for process and form improvement here. How would this stuff? What's the earliest? Let's say you redid this form. What would the process change be to roll it out? Would that be a guideline that had to be approved by the select board?
No.
Or you could just do it.
We could
guidelines have to go before the select board and cook for 35 days.
Do they?
Yeah, bylaw states that.
And I believe we have to have a public hearing before we
Yes, we do have to have a public hearing.
We don't have to have approval from the select board, though.
We have to let them look at it for 35 days.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think it sounds. Just trying to categorize this a little bit in my head. There's kind of 2 tracks here. One is a significant revision to the bylaw and guidelines potentially.
Yep.
And the other one is some short-term, important pain reducers, amending the form. I don't know if the stuff with the building inspector, that's more in the bylaw category.
Actually, I think it's in the form too.
It could be. I don't
The
know.
Form
Yeah.
2,
I don't know.
Form 2,
Yeah.
okay. So yeah, that's, because long story short is, if we need to change the bylaw to do anything with the form, or do anything with the building inspector, we might as well just start, the overall bylaw review, and then, make a note that we want to circle back and look at these things at the end, but, we might do them differently based on wherever we land with the bylaw and the guidelines. I don't know, that's just throwing that out there. Obviously, if you could do it quicker than making a bylaw change, then maybe there's a good case to just like.
And the more you talk, what I'm thinking is that maybe what we would do is that we will create 2 forms right now. The form that requires lots of detail, plans, specs, that kind of stuff. That's one that's going to require maybe a bylaw change. Whereas we could call out a form for something that's simple, where someone just sends a piece of paper to Marjorie and the town clerk and says, I'm thinking about putting solar panels on my roof. And we know that, if someone says, I'm thinking about putting solar panels on my slate roof, we would see that and we would say, okay, this is more detailed, because now you're going to have, you're clearly going to end up in a binding review. But so that's kind of what I'm thinking. I said, I'll see if we can change the form to make the pain easier or less for the resident, and then figure out a way to deal with the more complicated pieces.
That sounds great. Yeah, I mean, could you also get rid of that 6 or 8 copies and let them send it electronically or whatever?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, the funny part about it is that they have, in many cases, for the simple stuff, they've ignored the form, and we've said, all right, what do you want to do?
Yeah, no, and it's fine. We have the right to waive application
Right.
requirements.
Yeah, which is the
don't worry
reason why
about all that.
We haven't had any
yeah.
real complaints from residents.
No, we don't. It's just when more litigious people take a close look at the procedures and what the bylaw says and read over everything. It's like, well, this. Yeah.
That was, that's the irony of this, is that residents, they don't dislike us.
It's true. Mostly very
We just get
positive.
criticized on the
experience,
select board.
so. Well, great. Then I think we have some things to prepare for the next meeting.
I'll work on
Great.
the application.
So what I have for action items is bylaw review individually, applicant decision tree, the resident, flow chart,
Yeah, an applicant flow chart. Yeah.
and then an application form revision.
Yes. Yep. Revision. Possibly. Yeah. Different versions. Great. Do you want to? Normally we meet the first Tuesday of the month. Do you want to continue with that, or I mean, that's coming.
Well, we've kind of moved them around.
We have.
Yeah, and one of. Well, I had a conversation with Ellen Griffin, and she ended up calling you after I had my conversation.
Yes.
Because I was told once upon a time that we had to have the agenda posted 5 days in advance.
Huh,
It's
okay.
not.
No,
It's 48 hours.
It's 48. Yeah.
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 And the other thing that she said was, well, you guys shouldn't be meeting on Thursdays, because I had that room spoken for.
Yes. Which is why the last meeting. Why
What?
it got canceled and moved to today. So yeah.
So, but I noticed on the March meeting, there is a meeting scheduled. There's 2 meetings scheduled. One's a select board meeting, but on the other one, I don't know whether they meet here or not. But there are 2 conference rooms in this building.
There are apparently on Thursday. They're both booked though. Is
Yes.
what she told me. And so
Right.
if we do anything other
So-
than the first Tuesday of the month, that we need
Yeah.
to check with her
So-
and make sure that the room's available.
Like, for example, for the month of March, on March 7th, right now, the sewer committee, sewer revised, meets at 6 o'clock. Do you have any idea where they meet?
The Sewer Commission? Mm-hmm. I don't know. No, I don't. Don't know where they meet. Might be able to find out if we go on the town website.
So if
here.
they meet here,
They do.
they might be done by the time we get here.
It's
But I
probably done by then.
Yeah, well,
Hour and a
maybe hour and a half. But there's another room in this building. We just might not be able to use this one.
Okay.
So I'd say, as it stands right now, March 7th works for me.
Okay. I mean, that's the first Tuesday of the month.
Yeah.
So, it's just 2 weeks from now, but
That'll be good for us to get our work.
okay. all
Put
right.
some pressure on us.
Get back on the swing of things. Okay.
He won't get off of here July of 2024 if we don't get busy.
All right. Very good then. Why don't we'll plan for that. I'll confirm that with the clerk, and we'll get on an agenda in plenty of time so that we can have somebody scheduled to video the meeting, and the agenda will be posted.
Yeah. I have a question. There was conversation about this building across the street where the new insurance agency's moving into. Mm-hmm. We never reviewed that, did we?
We did.
When was that reviewed?
I'd have to look it up. But it was about a year ago.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Did they have vinyl siding on that building before?
I believe they did have vinyl siding or aluminum siding on that building, didn't they?
Yeah, it was one of those
It
two.
wasn't wood.
It
Yeah.
wasn't wood. Yeah, it wasn't concrete. It
They
Because there was a lot of conversation about how did that project get approved and we
Yeah.
can't get windows approved for the Ritter building.
yeah.
That conversation took place at the last select board meeting.
Yeah, I you sent that link, and I did check that out, and yeah, it was part of our decision making process. So there was like, if they really want to know, I think it was more a rhetorical question. So if they really want to know, we can explain our decision making process to them. But I'll wait for them to ask.
You know, by the way, they're waiting for us to tell them it's okay to put all new windows in this building.
Yeah, that was also at that meeting, and maybe because there seemed to be some lack of clarification that they needed to resubmit CTA. I think the town manager tried to tell them that, but there seemed to be some confusion about that. Do you feel like we need to contact them and let them know that we're waiting for that application, or?
I sent them an email the day after. I basically told the select board, told Heather that at the 6th December meeting, the town manager said she needed to hire a new architect. And I don't know whether there's been any action done. I doubt if there has been, given
Okay.
all the angst that she's dealing with regards to tax appraisals.
Sure.
Guess it wouldn't hurt to do an email follow-up, just be like,
Okay.
Well,
Have you guys
I've done that.
found a new-
You know, I've sent a note to the select board.
All right. Well,
Same.
when you do that, could you please CC the rest of us?
Well, I
in?
didn't
And
do that
par-
specifically.
Particularly if you're speaking for the board.
I
it's
was
important
not,
that we all-
and I specifically identified that I wasn't speaking for them.
Okay.
Because the
all right,
last
yeah.
time I did that, I was chastised about violating
Yes,
open meeting.
I've done the same too. You know, spoken for the board without the board's approval, and we can get ourselves into trouble. So we need to make sure that we're not doing that. And yeah, if you want to speak for yourself, that's fine. As an individual and not as a member of the board, that's absolutely fine.
Well, I did, since my name was specifically mentioned. I wasn't aware
Yeah.
that my name was going to be mentioned. at the
Okay,
meeting.
that's fine.
Yeah.
So it sounds like, yes, maybe they would appreciate a clarification. You know, this commission is obviously not allowed to put stipulations like you need to hire a new architect. Like we're not allowed.
No,
That's not within our power to require that. So
the town manager said she was going to do that.
yeah. But we can start off with per our last meeting, you were investigating a new,
right, yeah. But that's, in a way, I feel like that's their business as far as we're concerned in terms of administering this bylaw. We just need to make it clear that, no, we have not decided to reconsider our decision, and you would need to resubmit if you want to move forward with these renovations to the Ritter building, which I think we want to see happen, right? So we don't want to hold that process up.
What's funny, my Pella slider door window broke.
Okay.
In my experiences in dealing with Pella over the last 30 days, it's like, oh my God.
So is this board all okay? I don't think we need to vote on it, but are you okay with me writing to the select board on behalf of everybody to, okay,
Yeah.
we have approval. That's fine. And I'm just gonna explain to them that they need to submit a new application.
I mean, I'm not taking a position. This is old previous business that I don't. I mean, I'm a little bit aware of the situation. but,
Okay.
what's the goal? I guess ultimately here, you're looking for them to have some sort of more in-depth analysis of the cost of restoration versus new and comparative maintenance costs.
We did some of that. You know, part of the, I think the fundamental issue that we had here was the architect designed a project with restoring some windows and replacing some windows. And when we looked at the windows that he called to be restored or replaced, they weren't. I mean, that was the fundamental issue, is that we said, these big windows are in fairly good working order. You shouldn't replace them. Especially since you're going to restore windows, like the window that's behind you is going to be restored. That's what was in the set of drawings that we reviewed. And I don't think all the select board men, in fact, I know they didn't realize, because one of them told me that they didn't realize that not all the windows were going to be replaced. We haven't seen a set of drawings from the town that says we want to replace all the windows.
Well, no, not all the windows.
Right.
The original application said they were gonna just kind of like do a little restoration on the lower story windows and replace all these
The big ones.
the big ones. And this one I think was gonna stay
It's going to be restored.
restored. Yeah, okay. And we denied the application because we told them it's like, no, you can't replace those windows. And so now they need to resubmit the application. They have asked us multiple times if we would just rescind our decision, and we have not. I don't think we've brought it up several times and not decided to vote on it. So that's not happening so far. I don't see that changing, and it's very clear from the bylaw that what we do is if there's one particular reason why we deny their application, we'll point that out and say, here, this is where we had a problem. Why don't you amend your application this way, and we'll approve it. So
It became a moving target. You know, in fact, the first time that the town manager came and met with us back in October, I think it was, with the new facilities director, they were only talking about still replacing the pellet. We gave them a name of a company to do restoration work. And that guy came out and he looked at all of the windows and he gave a cost to restore all of the windows. Yet at that time, the town was still only discussing replacing the big windows. Windows like this and
Right.
the 12 over 12s.
yeah,
And we still don't, like, there still isn't a piece of paper from the town that says we want to replace all of the windows. We haven't seen that. Now, I think that's what they want to do.
is it? I don't know what they want to do.
But I know, but
Yeah.
you know, like the way this should work, and this was what I, you know, like, and at the 6th December meeting, you know, Heather said we need to replace the architect because that architect's retired. So I don't know what the charge to the new architect's going to be. Is it going to be to replace all the windows, or is it going to be just up? The other thing is there was some asbestos in the caulking that wasn't identified in the original plans. So,
Yeah.
and you know, all right. So that's where the impasse is. You know, the set of drawings that we disapproved has not been replaced with a different set of drawings.
Yeah. No, I mean, I've heard a little bit about the contention and the, you know, kind of different perspectives of the. I guess, I mean, would it be appropriate? I don't know if this is on the agenda or whatever. Is it appropriate for me to kind of give my take on this?
Yes.
I don't want to.
Yep.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. So, I guess, especially given the contentiousness around this particular issue. All right, so this is just me talking. This is my opinion. You know, from the original interpretation of the bylaw, windows were not. It was acceptable to replace windows, historic windows with replacement windows. They would be subject to might be subject to some appropriate design considerations, like appropriate style, but they were windows were replaceable, gutters, shutters, I think.
Gutters are off bounds.
Yeah, they're yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, continue. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. You're
I mean,
right.
there were a lot of things that roofing material. Roofing you could replace with different materials. Siding you could replace. A lot of latitude on the material. So yeah, I mean, I think it wasn't in the intent of the bylaw to restrict it. I'm not saying there's no value in ever doing it, but it wasn't. In my, I understand there's some different interpretations here, so I'm just talking from my opinion. Mm-hmm. Is being there, the intent was not to prevent replacement of windows and doors and whatnot. I get, specifically when I think about this building and I look around at it, the bylaw's one thing. So I think the bylaw says, no, the town could replace them. Number two is like, what's special about the Ritter building when you look at it? Similar to the building over there that Harry and Gary updated, right? They replaced those windows. The new windows look great. They got some good quality windows that work well with that, style of architecture. I just like the interior of this building could be changed under the APDC. It's not that special or historic. These windows, quite frankly, are not like, when I think of the Ritter and I have these fond thoughts, I think about the shape of the outside. I think of the brick. I think of the stonework. These windows never entered into, you know what I'm saying? So I understand with historical preservation, if the goal were to really preserve it, you might have a scenario where, those windows, it's important to sort of draw the line and, we're keeping the windows kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I don't think, my personal take is, given the history of the bylaw, given the contribution these windows make to the historic nature of the structure, this one included, quite frankly. This is not a hill I would choose to die on. Mm-hmm. And right now, there is a very pitched battle over this, and it's one of the factors that is creating that could create the kind of animus that makes people want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So my personal opinion would be, I get it. We've all got a lot invested in that, and I'm sure there were good reasons for it, whatever. But I would say if people are open to just saying, okay, you know what, we had this conversation, we learned something from it, we're going to figure out how to get a process where we have better alignment. At this point, we think the best thing is to let the town move forward, because otherwise, I think, it's not just the select board that's going to be agitated. It's the taxpayers. It's it's going to. That's my recommendation. Thanks for listening. I don't want to go overboard with that.
Okay.
Well, what's the irony of this discussion about the windows is that if the town does hire an architect and they revise the current set of drawings to replace all the windows, this project isn't going to move forward, which is really bad because there's not enough money. There's $120,000 that's been appropriated to replace some of the windows, to restore a large number of windows, and to do exterior painting of the entire building, and to do gutter and roofing repairs to the entire building. And that estimate is, I asked the question of how old is this estimate? And I never got an answer. I didn't ask how much the estimate was. All I know is that the town appropriated $120,000 to do this. So it isn't going to go forward, which is really bad, Nathan, because there are things that need to be done to this building that needed to be done in 2018 when Vertex wrote up the report.
Oh, wow.
So that's the real issue. And I think that the architect, when he did this mix of replace some, repair some, was looking at a budget that he had to deal with. Mm-hmm. And the select boardman thought that budget was going to get them all new windows. It's
Oh, wow.
not.
Gotcha.
Okay, all right, time to go?
I think it is.
Well, okay, are you wrapped up as far as your decision on that issue about running the select board or whatever goes?
I think so. I mean, I think what we want to do is kind of, what I'm going to do is explain to them what we understand as like what the process has been.
Yeah.
Right,
Say,
that-
you want to
that's-
replace all the windows? Send us a piece of drawing. Send us something that says you're going to replace all the windows.
Well, yeah, they need to resubmit a CTA, an application, right?
Yeah.
That's because we denied the last one.
Right.
And
There's
I know you would reconsider that decision, but the rest of the board has not reconsidered their decision.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, if we're voting on that, I'd say that's a 3-1, and I'm okay with that. I mean,
Okay.
you know, it's a respectful 3-.
Okay.
But you know, the fundamental issue here is that there was a cost comparison that was dropped on us the day of the town meeting. Special town
No, I get it.
Yeah.
Look, we don't have to
And
rehash.
that cost comparison isn't valid. It still isn't valid. You know, that was a point that I raised on the 16th of December, 16th of November, and I was told to cease and desist.
Yeah, I get that there was a lot of back and forth on that, and I'm not saying who's right and who's wrong or whatever. I don't want to. My only recommendation is, you know, I would, you know, yeah, you can. That's fine. It sounds like you guys want to continue with this, and that's okay. My suggestion is maybe might be a good time to put that past. And like you said, they still have stuff to do, and we'll see where it goes. But it might be, you know.
We could approve all brand new windows in this group tonight and it's still ain't gonna happen.
Okay. But you're saying put what in the past? You're recommending you.
I'd recommend saying, you know, well, I don't, you know, basically, long story short, I'm just putting this in my language, you know, that, you know, well, again, this is my opinion, so I'm not.
Okay.
If it were four of me here, which is good that there isn't, because you never
Okay.
want four of the same person, I would say basically, we're the committee, the APDC is, you know, it consents, you know, is fine with the town using its best judgment on the replacement of the windows at this point.
Oh, okay. All right.
That's basically what I don't know if that's the right process or if you have to issue something or whatever, but that's kind of where I'm going, because I think it's in my opinion, it's in the interests of the APDC and the select board and the town just to kind of like, it's generated a lot of heat.
Yeah.
And like Anthony's saying, it's not real, you know, let's move on from this one and let's get the bigger picture right. And, you know, unless you really feel like these windows are the thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So,
Okay.
yeah, and so I feel the same way. The select board should move on. Just forget about replacing the windows and let's get on with restoring the rest of the Ritter building. You know, so.
My fear is that, you know, if we said, like you just suggested, we just say, we'll move on, it's not gonna happen because the cost of replacing the windows exceeds the amount that's appropriated. So
Well, that's not on us at any.
Right, yeah.
it is on the town to try and figure out a way to make this project happen within the appropriated amounts,
Right, not our problem.
which is what the architect was trying to do.
Right.
Why he had to mix some, replace some, keep some.
I'm bringing down the gavel.
All right.
We're adjourning this meeting.
Okay.
At 7:26. Or I'm sorry, 9:26. 9:26. 7:26. All right.
All right, good stuff. Yeah, well, thanks for.
Yeah. Thanks, Nathan.